I like big bins. This week, Council delayed a public hearing as it had questions about its duty to consult with Indigenous nations.
Plus, Council reduced the parking requirement at daycares and discussed how to stop illegal dumping at apartment buildings.
Hi, I'm Mac.
I'm Stephanie.
And we're
Speaking Municipally.
Welcome back to Speaking Municipally, episode 362. I hope you're finishing the title of this week's episode in your head.
Yep.
I saw you dancing, Stephanie. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you were having fun recently, not on the pod. You did the trivia night that we talked about recently. How did it all go?
Oh, it was so fun. Thank you so much to everyone who came out. It was a really good time. It was super well attended and very warm in there, but that's okay. And I made a couple of mistakes in the tallying up of the numbers, but everyone was very gracious because it was my first time hosting all by myself. And there was a two-way tie for first place. And my tie-breaking question, they both were pretty close, but not quite. So the winners were the team Big Bike Lobby, BBL.
Nice.
And yeah, it was just great. So thank you guys for coming out. I hope to host another one, and I'm going to make it even harder.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that the people who won or tied were taprooters? Did that help? Did that knowledge help them?
Yes, they 100% were. I know this because I've spoken to them before, and I know they are. And then they got the prize were the little felted radishes that Karen makes, and they were all so excited. They pinned them right on their shirt. So thanks, you guys. Lovely. Thanks for the support.
Nice. Can you share your tie-breaking question?
Ooh, yeah. Well, I needed something really specific and nerdy, I thought, for the tie-breaking question so that it would be a good tie-breaking question.
Yeah.
But then everyone there was so smart and informed and engaged that I was like, I don't think it's hard enough. And I was pretty much right. My question was, what day did the Valley Line Southeast LRT open? And I remember it because I have a little button up here somewhere that says I rode the first Valley Line train on November 4th, 2023. That was the day. And both of them got the November right, but one team accidentally said it was in 2024, not 2023. So the other 2023 one.
It doesn't feel like it's been that long, I suppose. I would never remember a specific day like that. I'd totally have to look that up. I might get the general time of year right, but the specific day, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Okay, and you're going to do some more trivia in the future, so stay tuned for that. Stephanie's becoming the trivia master.
Yes.
We have one other thing before we start the show we want to bring up. We are approaching, of course, Canada's 159th birthday on July 1st. And I don't know, Stephanie, feels like a bit of a different one this year. There's a lot going on. We're having a referendum about a referendum, debates about immigration. We just, I feel like, got past the stage where you were unsure if somebody was waving a Canada flag, if that was a good thing or a bad thing. So in light of all of that, we're doing some reporting as we get to Canada Day next week. And we'd love to know from Taproot readers, listeners, and viewers what this year's Canada Day means to you. So we'll have a link in the show notes to a very short survey. If you want to take a few minutes to fill that out, let us know what it means to you. We might use your response in an upcoming Taproot story. All right, we have an ad for you.
This episode is brought to you by Edmonton Opera. The 2026-2027 season features The Barber of Seville in November and The Magic Flute in February. The opera duo package gets you a bit of a deal on both of these operas, setting you up for a couple of great evenings to look forward to. Here's artistic director Joel Ivany with more on that.
You get to come out to the Jubilee to hear something magical. So like you said, it can be a wonderful kind of date night where perhaps you have dinner before or you have a drink afterwards and you talk about what you saw. So it's a great chance to kind of hit that kind of cultural moment that perhaps you've missed for a while or you're interested in experiencing.
Your opera duo subscription also gives you the option to add on the ever-popular Opera al Fresco in August at the University of Alberta Botanical Garden. Subscribe today at edmontonopera.com.
Well done with the tongue twister on that one. Okay. I see that Rossdale was at council this week, rezoning or questions about the rezoning application down in the Rossdale neighborhood. But it wasn't all about rezoning, actually, it sounds like. The conversation veered into Indigenous consultation. What happened at council this week, Stephanie?
Yeah, so council was discussing a rezoning application that sort of formalizes what's already planned in the Rossdale neighborhood through the like 8 million different documents they have down there. But, the area redevelopment plan, like the transportation plan, all of this stuff. A few months ago, we talked about how city council was debating, developing the parking lot that is used for Riverhawks games. This is
Right.
connected to that.
Right.
So this is just the next step in that process. It is to change the zone from a direct control zone that it is right now to a new special area zone, which is it's kind of complicated, but basically it's like for this particular neighborhood, we need to have a specific Rossdale medium density or Rossdale high density zone, if that makes sense. The parcels that they were talking about include that gravel lot that the Riverhawks use, but it also extended north to surround the Arts Hub Artona building, which was kind of new. And I thought that that was interesting. So, to get a little bit like nerding in the weeds right now, when you're at a public hearing as a city councilor, you are only allowed to determine whether a rezoning application would result in a zone that is appropriate for the land. You are legally required to only think of that. So that's why sometimes you'll hear counselors, they start to ask questions about, will this be affordable housing? Can the
Right.
market support this type of housing? Will it be rentals? And legal will stop them because that's not what they're legally allowed to do. Or other examples like,
They can clarify what's in the zone and what's
yes,
allowed under a specific zone, but not about that specific project, just whether
yeah,
or not the zone that they're applying for is appropriate for that space.
yeah, yeah. It's like a very narrow set of questions that they're allowed to ask about. And what kind of came up as an issue at this meeting was the question of Indigenous engagement, because, of course, as we all know, the Rossdale neighborhood is deeply historical. Uh, Pre colonization, it was like a meeting place for, so long for Indigenous groups. And then it was also, the location of several forts. And now it's moved into another iteration of like an important part of our city. It's right in the heart of the river valley. And the question that a lot of the counselors had was, were Indigenous groups consulted on this? And again, it was hard for administration to kind of talk about it because of these rules that about the public hearing.
Right.
And administration said that they sent 2 or 3 emails to, the different groups, and they have received no response. And several of the counselors said that does not mean that they were engaged. Just because they did not send a response at all does not mean that they're like, "Oh, that's perfectly fine with it." You know, of course, like maybe they just are sick of dealing with the city and don't want to engage. Like, and the relationship needs to be built. I'm not saying that's what's happening because we don't know because they didn't engage, but that was kind of the tenor of the conversation that the counselors were having. Was it doesn't actually seem like we've fulfilled our engagement duties.
So administration said it sent emails to the governments of Treaty 6, 7, and 8, as well as the local Métis government and Lac St. Anne Métis Community Association, and said they sent them twice since November, but
Hmm.
did not receive any feedback.
Hmm.
It just feels like probably someone at the city has a relationship with
Hmm.
folks with these organizations. Like, could we not have picked up the phone and made a phone call? Like, I'm a bit shocked that they would
Yeah.
think, well, we sent 2 emails and we're good.
And they were very clear to say that those 2 emails were specifically in relation to the rezoning of this piece of land, whereas the entire river crossing redevelopment plan is still ongoing conversations, but just
Yeah.
related to this specific rezoning, they didn't receive. Maybe an analogy is if like I want to go talk to my neighbor, so I go and knock on the door once, no answer, I go and knock again. It doesn't mean that like I've engaged them. They weren't home and they didn't answer. You know what
Right.
I mean? Like you have to maybe try a little harder to try to talk to them. But then also at the same time, again, I don't know, but maybe the Treaty 8 First Nation is like, I don't care what you do. Leave me alone. I don't know. Like that's the thing is we just don't know.
I suppose that's possible. But,
Mhm.
I think in this case, because of what you said, the historical nature and the
Yeah.
strong Indigenous connections to this part of our city, it makes sense to put a little bit more effort into the engagement process than we would
Mhm.
normally otherwise do. In a normal situation where there aren't some of these other factors to consider, if nobody replies, okay, well, how hard are we going to work? to go and try to get a response from somebody, right? I think that is a fair thing to think about. And having a standard of practice for that makes sense. But in a situation like this, when we are in a city that has made commitments to truth and reconciliation, and we have an Indigenous framework and all those other things, feels like we could put in a little bit more effort to do that. So,
Mhm.
what did council feel about this? What did they say?
So they decided to postpone the decision to a future public hearing because, kind of coincidentally, there's actually a report going to Urban Planning Committee next week, on July 2nd, to talk about Indigenous engagement within the North Saskatchewan River area redevelopment area. And they wanted to be able to have that discussion and talk about these this maybe a new approach to Indigenous engagement before moving forward on this thing. However, I will say though, again, nothing is going to change at the next public hearing because all they're going to be doing at a public hearing is saying, is this an appropriate land use for this piece of land? And the city pointed out is that actually the change from DC to this new special area zone is not that much of a change. It's more of a kind of procedural thing. Mm, So what can be built there right now, if the city wanted to, they could dig up that land and build I think a 6-story tower on part of it, a little taller on another part. That's not changing.
I hear what you're saying, but let me just play devil's advocate for a minute. So, yes, we can only make a decision based on the appropriateness of the zone. But what is the point of having public engagement for a rezoning application in the
Hmm.
first place if it is not going to be considered a factor in the appropriateness of that zone? Right? Like if we have the application come forward and it checks a lot of technical boxes, but then we hear from everyone in the community that this would be horrible, surely
Hmm.
that should factor into the decision that council, the question that is before a council at a public hearing, right? And so
Right.
I think they need to have some indication about whether or not the affected groups in this case feel one way or the other, or are indifferent. They
For
didn't.
sure.
That's a factor that can go into their decision about this rezoning application.
Right.
Sounds like what they need though is a separate meeting that is not a public hearing to sort of debate this topic of whether they should engage or how much they should engage, or I think I saw you in your notes say whether they have a legal duty to
Hmm.
engage.
Yeah. So that was another thing that got brought up in the public hearing. And you hear this sometimes, the legal duty to consult, and this is with the crown governments. Now I'm a municipal government girly. This is not my forte, but there are certain projects and initiatives and whatnot in certain areas that the federal and provincial government have a legal duty to consult with Indigenous groups on. Do they always do that? No.
Right.
But there's another question here about whether the city has a legal duty to consult with Indigenous groups. And this report that I mentioned that's going to Urban Planning Committee next week says, quote, both the federal and provincial levels of government are the crown and therefore subject to the Section 35 requirements of the Canadian Constitution. The courts have confirmed that municipalities are not considered the crown for the purposes of a Section 35 consultation requirement. This applies to both public and private lands in the River Valley. However, the city has established its own framework for Indigenous engagement rooted in City Council's proactive policy commitments to reconciliation and the principles of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as articulated in the city plan and the Indigenous framework. So essentially what they're saying is we don't have a legal duty to consult, but we as a city have said that we do want to consult with Indigenous people and we should, but there's no legal duty as there is with the provincial and federal governments.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. If you read the very clear legal language around Section 35, then yes, no legal requirement on the municipal governments. But my understanding, I'm not a lawyer, is that the duty flows, right? It flows from the crown, applies to the federal and provincial governments. Municipal governments are simply a creation of the provincial governments. And so it would seem to me that it should flow down to municipal governments as well. Now, I believe the courts and the federal government have basically determined that this isn't settled law. It's kind of unclear about whether or not
Mhm.
municipalities have a flow through legal duty under Section 35. But like you said, and like this report says, we've made other commitments And we have our own framework for Indigenous engagement. We have policies and things like that that we've already committed to that suggest to me that we should be regularly engaging with these folks on particularly projects that affect them.
Yeah. Also, I just want to be clear that when I talk about all of these like reasons why council and administration is acting a certain way, it may sound like I'm defending them. I'm not necessarily taking a stance either way though. I'm just trying to explain this like imperfect bureaucratic system that all of this is existing in. Because
Yeah,
I'm like a very big rules and policy person and I can get a bit myopic and I really love like explaining this stuff, but I also want to be clear that I'm not saying like don't listen to anyone.
sure. Yeah, of course. So you said this is going to have this report on July 2nd at Urban Planning Committee, and then this rezoning is going to be pushed to July 6th. What
Mhm.
did Mayor Knack say about that?
You know, he said that people were using the public hearing to address a separate issue around governance about who should be allowed to build in the Rossdale area. And you know, they actually didn't even get to hearing from the speakers in opposition,
Really?
which, yeah, they decided to postpone it before they got to speakers in opposition, which honestly, I maybe think that was not a good move because they were really angry and they actually some of them got escorted out by security, and I think that if they would have just let them have their voice heard, like, that's what's important, that's what we're talking about here.
Right.
But then Knack was like, "All of you here, I really want you to mark in your calendar July 2nd and come back and have your voice heard because that will be the actual topic of discussion." And, you know, the speakers there, some of them were quite upset that this was being proposed. But yeah, so he really wanted people to come back for the July 2nd conversation.
It's kind of amusing, right? I know he's very well intentioned here, but make sure you put this in your calendar, ignoring the fact that we just rescheduled the one that was in the calendar for this meeting, and it might
Yeah.
have already been rescheduled from a previous. Like sometimes you want to go and speak at something at council, you got to come back 3 or 4 times by the time it actually gets on the agenda. So a bit rich. But yes, I hope that they do hear from the right people, the people they need to hear from as part of this conversation.
Yeah, totally.
Well, like council, we've spent a lot of time talking about the engagement of it all, but the actual rezoning application here, you said to go from a direct control zone to a special areas zone. What would that have actually changed, or what would be the result of this rezoning application if approved?
Yeah, so the documents that are going to go to the public hearing say that the new zones would allow for a built form that is similar to what is currently allowed, with the exception of special setback requirements. So the rezoning would allow for buildings of up to 15 stories on the northwest portion of the site, which is an increase from the current limit of 12 stories, and a larger footprint would be permitted. And then the current zoning allows for up to 7 stories on the kind of like east and south portions nearer to the Riverhawks field, which is not set to change. And then another thing is that it kind of adds in between this is like the special area zone part, is that between all of these developments, they want to have like special pedestrian alleys, which I think is just like paths that cars can't go down and they have individual unit entrances onto them. So just like fun little urban planning stuff.
Interesting. Okay, so not dramatically different
No.
from what's there now. And so this
Yeah.
is not really a question of, oh my God, this is a really big change. How could you not engage with anyone? It almost
Mhm.
seems like they wanted to litigate the lack of engagement or the approach to engagement more broadly, right? Which
Mhm.
I guess is where we're at. So we
Mhm.
will look for that report on July 2nd and then this rezoning application on July 6th, right before council goes on its break.
I wanted to say one more thing before we wrap this topic up. As we know, like when there's the question of land sales and development and stuff, administration has to be pretty hush hush to like protect bargaining power. But one thing that they hinted at, or at least this is what I got from the hint, is that they really want to partner with First Nations partners to potentially build something. And I think we've seen that in other
Right.
cities where, you know, it's land kind of returned to these nations. And you know, that would be a great economic development thing for these nations. And also, you know, they can then have like obviously way more of a say in developing the land. But again, they were kind of like, we can't really say anything
We
yet.
can't talk about that yet, but stay
Yeah.
tuned. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Well, we will. All right. Next up, we want to talk about that very Edmonton thing, parking, this time in the context of daycares. So, also at public hearing this week, council made a decision about this. So, what's the context here, Stephanie, and what did they decide?
So, council voted on Tuesday to reduce the required amount of pickup and drop off spaces for daycares. And, city staff said that it removes regulatory barriers for those setting up small scale daycares. They're kind of the ones more in neighborhoods, not like bigger facilities in like a strip mall. This is more for neighborhood ones. And they did this because they did an analysis of the first year after the updated zoning bylaw and found that on average, fewer than half of on site parking spaces were used during the peak periods. And they also found that 17% of trips to and from childcare facilities were made by walking or cycling, which I thought was interesting. So the current requirement is 2 spaces for the first 10 kids and 1 space for every additional 10 kids. And then the new requirement is 1 space for every 10 kids. So just reduces it by a bit. And then they also now allow a 50% reduction to the on site parking requirement if unrestricted street parking is available. So if there's like tons of street parking around, because they were finding that parents just use the street parking anyways, because it's more convenient than having to like go around and park and back in. Whereas, I mean, I love using street parking. I will usually use it rather than finding a parking lot. So yeah.
Okay, when I saw this, one of the things I was curious about is parking minimums, which we eliminated in Edmonton. But my understanding is that there are some of these specific requirements that were kept, such as minimum number of spaces for daycares. Is that your understanding as well, Stephanie? Like, we're not changing parking minimums here across the board. This is a very specific thing to
Yeah.
daycare regulations.
Yeah, exactly. It's just really specific to the daycares and like especially kind of smaller scale ones in neighborhoods, not necessarily like the ones in strip malls, like I said.
Okay, well, I have a little bit of experience with daycares, although not those little ones in a neighborhood, mostly in and around a school or large buildings and stuff like that. You mentioned the 17% surprised you. In what way?
Mhm.
Like high or low?
Both. And here's why. So I live in a central neighborhood and I see if I ever go for my afternoon walk around 3:30, I see like moms and dads picking their
Yeah.
kids up from school and walking and it's lovely. However, at the same time, my family mostly lives in more suburban areas and I've gone with my sister to pick up my nephew from daycare and like, it's one of these kinda day home places where it's, like, right in the middle of a neighborhood, and though it is a short drive away, it is still a drive, and, like, we pulled up, and there was, cars everywhere, and it was very, like, crowded, and it was winter, so there was windrows, so it was, like, very tough to get around, but the thing is that it was because of the suburban style of development, she wouldn't have really been able to walk or bike there, also because it was winter. So, my experience with picking up my nephew from daycare, is like, it would be insane for anyone to try to walk and bike and do this. However, at the same time, my experience being a central neighborhood girly is like, why would anyone ever wanna have to drive to daycare? And, like, ideally, in an ideal world, you could just walk, even if you lived in the suburbs, right?
You could, but
Yeah,
people don't walk when they live in the
yeah.
suburbs. This is the thing that surprised me about this number is that 17% seems kind of high. You
Yeah,
know, I
that's what
mean,
I mean.
like, I feel like the number of people that drive, I can't remember off the top of my head what those numbers are for Edmonton, but it's a large number. It's a
Yeah.
high percentage of people who that's their mechanism of travel, and it's just not practical. You're not going to take your kid to daycare, walk there, and then walk home and get in your car and go to work. You're going to do that all as part of one contiguous trip, right? And you're going to
Mhm,
drive. So I was a bit surprised by that number. I don't see this 50% of peak times being empty to me, and in my limited experience, in more central areas, those spots are always full of people at drop off and pick up, right? It's a bit surprising to me that they found fewer than half were used. Like, I would have thought those would be fully maximally utilized, and they're even for a short period of time. It doesn't take long to drop your kid off into the daycare in and
mhm.
out, but there's a lot of people at those daycares sometimes. I guess if they're really small, maybe that is the case. So I feel like this is a good decision for council to have made. We don't need to have more parking than is necessary. If the actual evidence is that we don't need all of these spots, then we shouldn't require them. Not necessarily, in my opinion, because we want to make it easier for people to set up small scale daycares. I think look around the city, we have way too many small scale daycares, a little bit of the gold rush that has happened as a result of
Mhm.
daycare subsidies, but just because we don't want more people to be driving and we want to encourage modes of transportation other than the vehicle. Part of that is making it better to be a cyclist or a transit user or a pedestrian, make those experiences great. And part of it is to stop making it so much easier and quicker and convenient to be a driver in a vehicle. And one less space per 10 kids. My read of this is really not much of a change, but anything
No.
makes a little bit of an impact.
Yeah, and it'd also only be to, like, new ones that happen, in the future, so it's gonna be a really small change.
I feel like we should just, before we close on this, say that we understand that everybody's family situation is different, and
Uh-huh.
some kids it's much more challenging, and there's lots of reasons you might want to use the car versus another mode of transportation. So please don't misinterpret the comments as,
Yeah.
passing a judgment on how you choose to get to daycare. Although, if you could bike or walk, I'm a little bit passing judgment. That's just the reality of it. But I understand that people have other factors to consider. But it's hard when you're on city council to think of everybody's individual little experiences. You have to try to make the best decision for the city as
Mhm.
a whole. And so sometimes when they make decisions like that, like this, I think that's what they're going for, right? What would be best across the board here to try to build the city that we're trying to build?
Yeah, have the most benefit for the most amount of people. So I mentioned, something I see living in a central area is families walking home from school. Another thing that I see living in a central area is a lot of illegal dumping at the condos and apartments in the area, and that's something that was brought up this week at city council, or more specifically at utility committee.
Illegal dumping. Okay.
Mhm.
This brings up lots of memories for me. The Edmontonian was a upstart digital publication in our city a while back, and Jeff Samsonow was the editor publisher there. And I remember they did a series about couches. People had left couches on the side of the road all around the city. Nobody knows why or what happened to those things, but that was really interesting. It was such a unique Edmonton thing. That's kind of what I think of when I hear illegal dumping. But this is really what more about people putting their waste in dumpsters that don't belong to them. Is that what this is about?
Well, that's the thing, is that I feel like there's several problems here that everyone's trying to fix, and we'll see if it's effective. Yeah, the city administration put forward this report about illegal dumping and ways to stop it. And some measures that city staff are considering include more free eco station days. So free eco station days are when you can go and drop stuff off for free, because normally you have to pay like a small fee to dispose of, for example, a couch. I did that
Yeah,
a few years ago.
depending on what the item is. Yep.
Yeah, some stuff you don't have to. And they're saying we should have more of them, and we should spread them out and have some on weekdays, because on the weekends the lines are really long.
Yep.
A public awareness campaign about illegal dumping,
Yeah. Well,
which
if you want to buy some ads on Taproot to help people understand
do
where
you
not
really
to
think that
dump illegally,
do you think Taproot members are regularly dumping illegally?
I don't, but I'm sure they could be great ambassadors for this
True.
public awareness campaign. So, City of Edmonton, we'll
Yeah.
take your ads. Yep.
Education for condo or apartment managers, such as tips about putting bins further away from the street, or site monitoring tools. I think that means cameras that
Yep.
can check license plates, higher fines, and then a large item pickup program, which I think would be essentially like you illegal dump on the right day that they
Yeah.
come and take it away for free.
Interesting.
And like big bin item
Like
days. That's
like we
sort of,
do for Christmas trees, right? There's
yeah.
specific times where you can leave your trees out and the city will pick it up. But if you
Mhm.
don't do it within those windows, you're on your own.
So the committee said, "Nice, we love it." This was just a report to be received for information, that they're telling council that they were doing this. But one thing that they did want to pass was, that administration, as part of the waste utility rate filing for 2027, they incorporate some options to mitigate the financial impact of illegal dumping on multifamily housing providers, condo associations, and residents. So when there's a couch or a mattress or something dumped in the back alley and someone has to pay to get it removed, figure out a way to work in some sort of financial payback for that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Which, some buildings might be able to do already if, they do have cameras or some ability
Hmm.
to see, who left that there. But there's other areas where that's much more challenging. So I look forward to seeing what administration might come up with as part of this 2027 waste utility rate
Mhm.
filing report. Uh, you mentioned earlier that they're trying to solve like a few different problems. What are the problems you see here?
Well, so I think that there's kind of three separate issues here with waste in general. The first is residents not sorting correctly, throwing
Hmm.
glass in the garbage or putting plastic in the compost, and that's just in the kitchen in the house. That's where that comes from. The second problem is this like capital I illegal dumping, where you leave something like a couch or a mattress beside the dumpster, and
Yep.
that's someone has to drive up and dump it there, and it's a very intentional thing to dump this there. And then the third issue, which is something that I experienced living in a central area that's a bit on the rougher side, or there's some folks living rough around. People will just discard their belongings in garbage cans. Now, in my experience, composting is really difficult because I put my eggshells and my food scraps in there all week and then go outside to dump it. And I open up the compost bin and someone has just discarded a bunch of like clothing and glass and maybe drug paraphernalia into my compost bin. And of
Right.
course, if it's contaminated at all, that whole bin goes to the dump instead of to the compost. And every time I'm like, why did I have this in my kitchen all week this is going to if there's no point. And that now all of these three things are kind of difficult to fix. I don't know. I don't know what the fix are for any of these things.
Well, I'm not sure that a public awareness campaign really is going to make all that much of a difference, but I do think there are some things that could happen. And I guess education awareness is never a bad thing. Like the more people that know about these things, the better. I think about my experience downtown in a high rise. Feels like a lot of the problems you described are solved if you have the bins inside,
Yeah.
locked away in the parkade. That's where ours are. So we don't have a problem of people putting things in the bins that shouldn't be in there. On the organics, we almost have the opposite problem. When I go at the end of the week to empty out my coffee grinds and eggshells and vegetable clippings and stuff, it's empty. Like, I don't know if enough of my neighbors in the building are actually composting. Like,
Hmm.
it's really like nobody seems to use the green bins that we have, which is really
Yeah.
interesting. But, getting stuff left there in the bins can be solved by making those bins harder to access, for one thing. Not always feasible, depending on the construction of the building and where it is. Another thing that I think can be really effective, though, and I'm, excited to hear about the idea of perhaps doing some big bin events just for this,
Mhm.
do those kinds of special pickups. I think this can be really, really successful. So, my own personal experience here is that on 104th Street downtown, all of the buildings, the residential buildings, got together in August of 2020, which feels like it's not the right time because all I remember is pandemic, but the email proves it. It was back in August of 2020, and they organized a bin. So the residents, all the neighboring buildings paid for a 310 dump to bring a big bin. They left it on 104th Street for 2 or 3 days. You had to pay a small fee, $25 as a resident, and you could go and take things and leave it in the bin. So people got rid of couches. We got rid of our old couch that way, or a mattress, or those kinds of things. You could take them down, leave them in the big bin, pay the fee to your condo association. Now all of that's taken away, and it solves a whole bunch of problems, right?
Mhm.
Uncertainty about what you do with these things. If you don't have a vehicle or you don't want to have to go and rent a truck, probably it's a higher likelihood, I think, if you live in a multi-residential building somewhere like that, that you just have never been to one of the city facilities. You might not know what it's
Mhm.
like to go to an eco center, right? And so these big bin events can just make it a lot easier. I think if you make it easier for people to dispose of their waste properly, they will. So I would like to see more of these big bin events. If the city can do something to work with, housing providers, condo associations, that kind of thing to make those feasible, that sounds to me like a great way to mitigate some of these challenges that they highlighted with this illegal dumping report.
Yeah, I think that there are plenty of people that would do the right thing if it was like 1 centimeter easier. And if they can make it a little bit easier, then yeah, go ahead and do it.
Just one other thing I want to say about, the eco centers. Every time I've been to one of those, the eco stations, the staff are so friendly and lovely and like
I was thinking
they
that.
they decorate it at Christmas time. It's actually a really good experience.
Yeah, maybe that's what they need to do, is make it an even better experience. And then everyone will be like, yay, let's go to the eco station. Because I love going to the eco station. They're so nice.
They're very nice. I mean, sometimes the lines are crazy, but if you avoid those peak times and go other times, it's a wonderful experience.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, well, hopefully you had a wonderful experience listening to this podcast. We are rapidly approaching the summer break. City Council will be on break for about a month. We take a short publishing break, but not for a few weeks. We still got a few more episodes to go. So we hope you'll join us wherever you get your podcasts, whether you're listening or watching, and leave us a rating, a review, a comment if you can. That would really help spread the word so that other people also get to experience the work that we do every week on Speaking Municipally. We'll be back next week. Until then, I'm Mac.
I'm Stephanie.
And we're Speaking Municipally.